Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the special board meeting on the 14th of November, 2023. I want to start us off in a good way by recognizing and acknowledging both the Esquimalt and Songhees nations on whose traditional territories we live, we learn, and we do our work. Trustees, may I have a mover to approve this evening's agenda? Thank you, Trustee Bayo, and a seconder, Trustee Kwan. Thank you. Any changes or amendments to the agenda? All right, hearing none, all those in favor? And that is unanimous. Thanks, trustees. All right, so we have a couple of items on our agenda. We're going to start off at B. This is our 2024-2025 annual budget kickoff meeting. So tonight we're going to discuss budget process, budget information, all things budget. So I'm going to turn the floor over to our Secretary Treasurer, who's prepared a memo by way of background to ground our conversation. Secretary Treasurer, whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, included in your agenda package is a nice short memo, just with reference to the 2023-2024 budget process. So included in the documents are the values and guiding principles, and those are the values and guiding principles of the board. And so each year, these are reviewed. Last year it was reviewed by the Budget Advisory Committee and also by the board. So that will need to be looked at again as we move forward in the 2024-2025 process and just make sure that everything is still aligned. I've also included in there the final budget process and timeline for last year. We did shuffle a few things around, and so there's some notes at the bottom showing what was moved around. But you can kind of see that the process started with the approval of the process in September, but the meetings with Budget Advisory Committee didn't kick off until November. And then there were quite a few meetings right up to when the budget was approved in early April. I've also included in the agenda package the Budget Advisory Committee, the terms of reference. So this terms of reference included is the one that was approved by the Budget Advisory Committee last year. And you can see in there the purpose of the committee, who is on it, and the duties and responsibilities and accountability. So I won't go through everything, but it's there if you want to take a look. One of the things the board may want to consider this year is how the Budget Advisory Committee worked last year. If there are any changes that we might want to consider either in the composition of the committee or how the committee is used in this upcoming process. And lastly, also included the Budget Advisory Committee's recommendations to the board. I've included this document because it has a really good summary of the work of the committee. So it also kind of restates what's in the terms of reference, talks about how many meetings were held, events that were held for students and rights holders, stakeholders, public, and also includes a link to all of the agendas, the presentations and minutes from the Budget Advisory Committee. There, everything is on the district website. And then it also proceeds to go through and detail everything that the Budget Advisory Committee discussed in each of the meetings throughout the budget process. Towards the end, we also include in there how we were able to get feedback from rights holders and our education partners, and especially from our students. The Budget Advisory Committee is not a decision-making body, so it essentially makes recommendations to the board. And last year, and it's also based on consensus. So it's a very large group, lots of differing opinions on how to move forward with the budget. So we weren't able to reach consensus But included in this package as well are some of the key questions that the committee looked at and a breakdown of how people were feeling towards the end of that process. And this information was provided to the board in advance of its budget decisions. And I think that's it for historical information, but we're here tonight, obviously, for the board to receive feedback from everyone regarding how to move forward with the 2024-2025 budget process.
Thank you very much, Secretary Treasurer. I'm going to just open the floor initially for anybody that has any questions about the previous process. And so any questions in relation to the memo that the Secretary Treasurer prepared for us this evening? Trustee Kwan, go ahead.
Sorry, I lost my mouse for a minute. Unmute. I just had a quick question about the notes from the representative student council advisory. I'm sorry, RACS. That's how I know it as, but the full name. I noticed that there's a link and it says to the notes, but I didn't notice the notes contained where that link led to. And I just wondered if those can be provided or.
Thank you, Trustee Kwan. Secretary Treasurer or possibly Superintendent, are we able to provide a link or provide those notes?
Yeah, the notes would have been included. So everything that was done in Budget Advisory Committee also flowed through to the next board meeting. So it would be included in the board meeting agenda package. I'll take a look on the website, but there should be a link beside that on the website that includes it, and if I find it, I'll let you know. But there definitely were notes written out and included publicly, so I'll share them as soon as I can find them.
Appreciate that, thank you. And you're right, it's probably in the pack up, and I'll go back and take a look as well, see if I can find them. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Kwan. Thank you, Secretary Treasurer. Okay, so sorry, Trustee Painter, go ahead. I almost missed your hand, but then I saw it in the corner of my eye. So go ahead.
I may be jumping the gun, Chair, so I'll just hold off for a moment.
Okay. So what I wanted to do is just sort of ground us before we get into our discussion. So we have two items to sort of frame or to help focus our discussions. The first under B1 is around budget process. So this is our opportunity tonight to have some open and respectful dialogue about possible budget process for this year. You'll note from the timeline that we are kind of a little bit behind the curve in terms of our timelines, and we want to get started as soon as possible. And so tonight's conversation, I just want to sort of encourage everybody to feel free to contribute your thoughts. What I'm going to suggest is that we move into a committee of the whole for that discussion. Just allows us to relax the rules and have a little bit more free-flowing dialogue. And that dialogue is not just for the board, it's also for our partners. And so I would invite all of our partners to feel free to contribute to that discussion this evening. If as we go through, if I don't see a hand, please, I'll rely on my colleagues and also staff just to let me know. I'll do my best to scan through everybody, but if I do miss a hand, then please just let me know. Okay, so trustees, if I may, assuming that you are in agreement that moving into a committee of the whole will help aid our discussion. And if so, may I have a mover to move us into committee of the whole? Thank you, Trustee Gagnon, seconded by Trustee Mabowi. Any discussion? All right, hearing none, all those in favor of moving into a committee of the whole? And that is unanimous. Okay, so we are in a committee of the whole. It allows us to relax the rules a little bit. I'll ask everyone to still raise your hand if you'd like to speak. But again, we're going to focus first at B1, and that is on budget process. So looking forward to hearing our thoughts on budget process. Maybe I'll kick us off. So one of the things certainly that I've heard as a result of our last budget process was that folks are very keen to have an opportunity to discuss other aspects of the budget and maybe get into some more detailed or deeper discussions. So one of the things certainly that I've heard, one of the ideas that I've heard is that we maybe look at having some working groups established with trustees and partners around working group tables to dive into more detailed consideration of certain aspects of the budget. So for instance, you know, a working group who's tasked with looking at special purpose funds and how those budgets are allocated. Maybe another working group on elementary school funding. Maybe another working group on some of our capital funding. So that was certainly one of the potential options. We don't need to keep doing what we've done. We can do something different if we think that's going to serve our purposes and get us where we want to go. And again, we obviously want to be grounding whatever we do process-wise. With our focus on our priorities around student achievement and well-being, our strat plan goals, our enhancing student learning report commitments, and so on. So, budget process, how are folks feeling? And again, this is a safe place. It's really an opportunity to have dialogue, and so feel free. Trustee Painter, go ahead.
I have a number of thoughts, but I'll limit myself to one for now, and in no particular order priority. I'm mindful of how we engage with rights holders, and it's articulated in the package. I'm just seeking clarification from the rights holders that the method that is laid out there meets their needs. Certainly there is a chair around this notional table, this virtual table, but that's a matter of capacity. So whether they want to have presentations brought to them, whether they want to have packages, it's just what do they need to feel that they can meaningfully contribute to our discussions, deliberations.
Thank you, Trustee Painter. That's a great, important question. I wonder maybe if staff, if Superintendent Whitten has anything that she wants to add at this point in terms of process or sort of where we are. And if not, maybe just something to keep in mind, something that we want to make sure we clarify or maybe provide an opportunity to hear directly from rights holders about how they would like to be included in the budget process this year.
Through the chair, I can add some piece to that, and others can jump in if they want to. I've been having conversations with Dr. Shelley Nimi about the budget process and how to best have their voices heard, like through our local nations and through our 4 houses, but also Indigenous students. And so we've had lots of really great conversations about that. We have plans, Julie and I, along with Dr. Shelley Nimi, to meet with the 4 houses without an agenda to basically sit down and talk about the budget process and even ask about the budget advisory committee to see is that something that works for them, or is there some other way that we can engage with them in a culturally sensitive way to help guide us through the budget process this year.
Thank you, Secretary Treasurer. And so in terms of that feedback, we appreciate you and Dr. Nimi undertaking that communication and providing that opportunity for that dialogue. And the plan is to bring that back to the board in some fashion at a later date once those conversations have occurred.
I would assume so. I really don't have any assumptions about what those meetings might be, but I think if there's any information that they would like us to share, we can certainly do that.
Yeah, no, I think the board would just be interested in making sure that our process was culturally responsive and provided space for all 4 houses to contribute their thoughts to the budget process. Dr. Nimi, go ahead.
Excellent. Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, loud and clear.
Okay, great. Yeah, just to build upon Secretary Treasurer Stride's comments and the question coming from Trustee Painter. So we have meetings set up over the next 2 months to be able to really look through that lens around getting ready for budget, knowing that we're also going to be shifting, right? So I think it's really important for the board to also recognize that we're going to be going through the process of moving into Bill 40, right? And what that looks like. So this is going to be a transition year for community with the 4 houses. And I think that there's going to be pieces within Bill 40 that really does guide our practice on how the board and the 4 houses will be in that relationship as it relates to financial obligations and relationship. So I think that piece also, I just want to put on the table for us to consider and hold that space, because we're in the place right now where we're navigating as the 4 houses and staff on through that process now, right? So getting ready for preparing for that transition. We had that meeting at the end of last school year. We're gearing up to navigate back to that table. And then through that, we've also been very open in the conversation about how, asking the question, right? How might that look for you this year as we're transitioning, and what that looks like for your involvement, and knowing that each one of the houses has different capacity and abilities to participate, not saying that they don't want to, right? But looking at that, right? And with the change of chief and council in Esquimalt Nation, I know that we've also reached out to be able to navigate what does that timeline look like for you as well. So I think, just to kind of come full circle in the conversation, we're in an active, ongoing conversation around this process with that engagement. I think between Secretary Treasurer and Assistant, looking at Julie, right, the 2 of them working with us through that process, I think is going to be great. And then we'll bring that back to this table through the Secretary Treasurer's office, right? I'm very hopeful that we'll see more engagement in different ways, but it'll all depend on capacity and no expectations, right? The expectation that I just don't want us to feel that if there isn't participation from all 4, then it isn't a meaningful process, right? So we'll kind of let community guide that, but we're really excited to have them be a part of these ongoing conversations. I guess I'll come back through the chair to Trustee Painter. Did that suffice to the question?
Trustee Painter, go ahead.
I understand that, at this point in the discussion that meets my needs. My biggest concern is knowing that we're not imposing something, that the relationship going forward is one that is collaborative and meets the needs of the 4 houses.
Through to the chair to respond to Trustee Painter. I agree. And I think that's the intention, right? And I think that's the approach that we'll take through that culturally responsive lens. And then we'll also land on through the legislation around Bill 40, because that's actually going to guide our practice across the entire province. And so I think just being very open around that too. And we're going to navigate through that with each of the houses on what that responsibility looks like as we move into there. So I do think it will be a transition year for us. And I'm trying to be open for everybody within community and within our own organization and the board, so then that way we can move through into that next phase for us in a really I would say in a really easy way of that transition, because it's new for everybody. Even though we've had an Indigenous Education Council for over 40 years, there is going to be some different ways that we're engaging in dialogue, and that will be a change for how maybe it looks for involvement with these types of discussions, but that's okay. We'll work through that together.
Thank you, Dr. Nimi, and thank you, Trustee Painter, for the question. I think hopefully there's just opportunity that this opens up the door to lots of interesting and meaningful opportunity for dialogue. And perhaps what we're servicing here is maybe a need on behalf of the board to understand really the implications of Bill 40. And so there's maybe some learning that the board would benefit from in terms of understanding those implications moving forward. So yeah, that's something that we'll look at. Okay, so wanting to turn back to other folks around the table, any other questions around process? Or just ideas, right? So really tonight we want to talk through ideas about how we could work the budget process this year. We are in the middle of November already, and so we do have a lot of work to do. And so we want our process to help support that, doing good work together, trying to look at budget allocations and potential reallocations. Trustee Painter, go ahead.
A couple of thoughts about some of the presentations we had through the budget committee last year. And for my own purposes, I think it's well known. I'm a bit of a navel gazer. I like to think about things rather than, I don't move very quickly sometimes. And I would really prefer to see the various team presentations, the budget component of that up front as early as possible in the process. Certainly, depending on the manner we choose to move forward, there would be an opportunity for presentations down the road, but having information up front about the budget or the proposals would be really helpful for me. It gives me a chance to formulate questions and to better understand the content by comparing the different units. I'd also be really interested in a summary of last year's expenditures within those presentations, so that we would be able to actually understand what the money was spent on the year prior, and then what, if any, changes are being recommended this year, so that we can have a better understanding of the year-over-year changes that might be considered or proposed. I'll just stop there.
Thank you, Trustee Painter. Yeah, in terms of the presentations, I think some of the feedback I've heard from folks is that, we are grateful to have the presentations, but perhaps this year we can move into some other analysis or other considerations and just have the presentations, if that's how they come, in pack-ups. Trustee Kwan, go ahead.
Yeah, I'd love to hear, hopefully, from some of the folks around the table here, with regards to student involvement. One of the things that was really meaningful in the process last year was the student symposium. I thought that was really well done. Kudos to our senior leadership staff for putting that together. That was amazing. I think it would be great to even, if we have the capability to do more than one, and have even more students involved in the process. Just wondered what thoughts were out there and how people felt about that.
Thank you, Trustee Kwan. Yeah, great question. They were wonderful. It was so wonderful to get feedback from students. And we did two. So we did the symposium, and then there was the a student representative body that also provided feedback. So there was 2 points of feedback last time round. Anyone want to have any thoughts about how we might do it this year? Do we want to repeat that? Do we want to add in another layer or a different layer? Have we had any feedback from students? Wonderful. Hi, Tina, welcome. Go ahead when you're ready.
Hi there. As a school-based administrator, I was really, the student symposiums to me were so powerful to see the reaction of the students to have that opportunity to meet with other students, but also to have your attention as trustees. So as school-based administrators, we try and pick a representative group of students, but sometimes the barriers of who's there that day to go to the symposium, like we're maybe not getting the same cross-section of students, but the students that do attend, it's a really, really empowering experience. So thank you for that. And I just want to say that for me, I've enjoyed a couple of times I've had the opportunity to do the table talks with the trustees, and having in a casual setting, just being able to talk about, having trustees ask me about my job and what I do in the day. And in that casual setting, I find that really, and I know it costs money because it was a meal. But I found for myself that was a really good way to share our perspectives on what's going on in the schools, and so I enjoyed that as a school-based administrator. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I think we got some wonderful feedback about the table talks and also the student symposium. So we definitely have some really well-functioning, helpful parts of the process from last time around. That's yeah, we've heard lots of good things about it. Just speaking to providing all students with more flexibility and opportunity to feedback. Do you have any advice for the board just around how we might create our process in a way that would allow more flexibility, allow more students to access that forum?
I mean, that is the challenge, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I know as administrators, we've driven students and picked them up and tried to make it as easy as possible. Even if maybe, because we're organizing family of schools, if a couple of trustees came to visit, a high school or a middle school, and students from the family of schools got to pop by just for a tea or something, some big questions, that might be a bit more casual. Even then, even asking a student to attend that meeting is kind of nerve-wracking. They have to have a certain amount of confidence to be able to do that. If it's something casual in a school, might be a little bit more, less barriers.
Thank you so much. Yeah, we actually heard that from some trustees, like the idea of going around and just making ourselves available, letting us do the transportation and getting places. Yeah, thank you. Trustee Gagnon, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. And for Principal Purick, like if it works, I could possibly go over to a Lambrick or a Gordon Head, and if it was possible to have students basically walk across the lawn from one to the other to do, I'm all for that. I don't know if any of my other colleagues would be able to do that with their own families of schools, but or to come to the Lambrick Park family, but I am 100% on board for that.
Thank you, Trustee Gagnon. Yeah, I suspect colleagues would be very enthusiastic about being able to talk directly to students. So yeah, great idea. Dr. Nimi, go ahead.
Just to follow up too. So one of the things that we're doing with Indigenous students this year, particular to engage them in the budget process, is last year we started having a grade 11 and 12 Indigenous student gathering. And so we're going to be involving them as part of that gathering, just to seek their feedback while they're together around the budget. So that's one of the pieces. And then the other one that we're activating is we're starting a Campus Cousins between high schools. And so the Campus Cousins is going to be another platform that we'll be working through the Office of the Secretary Treasurer to be able to engage students in that. And so we're looking at different platforms to be creative too, as I know other departments are as well. And so I think, looking at many of the different entrance points for students that can't attend a symposium is also really helpful as well. So I just want to put that into the circle today as well.
Thank you very much. And I'm sure trustees would be very happy to receive an invitation to meet directly with students, Indigenous students as well. Okay, so some great ideas maybe about trying to remove some of the barriers to students' ability to participate, and also an opportunity for trustees in particular to hear more directly from more of our wonderful students. Okay. So maybe some ideas. What I'm hearing is that folks really liked and appreciated the opportunity to have table talks because it provided a more casual forum to get to know each other and hear about some of the stretches in the system, some of the gaps, but also some of the opportunities. We really enjoyed this opportunity to hear from students through the symposium. Maybe some other opportunities this time around, though, for trustees to be the ones that do the traveling and help to remove some of those barriers for students so we can hear from more students. Trustee Kwan, go ahead.
Sorry, just following up on a point that Tina made as well, with regards to, her own thoughts with the table talks and, further to the student symposiums, if we can come to larger groups of our partners, stakeholders, rights holders, and really get a feel for, the group, the budget advisory committee has, a member or two from each of our stakeholders or rights holders, but hearing from the group and giving that time, to each of them, I think, would go a long way. And I think, you get some really great, like we said, you get some really great conversations going. It's a little more informal, and, if trustees are willing to travel and, come together and chat informally over tea or coffee, it really does go a long way. So, I would absolutely be interested in that as well.
Thank you, Trustee Kwan. Yeah. So perhaps creating an opportunity for the board to have that more informal discussion with each of the partners around the table. So like GVTA, both QPs and VP, VPA. And then rights holders, at their direction really at this point. But we're waiting to kind of hear some feedback about how the board might be part of those discussions. So yeah, so Ilda, go ahead.
Thank you. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I was waiting for you to
No,
finish.
just summarizing.
I just wanted to add that my members really enjoyed being a part of the table talk session that evening, and really appreciated the trustees' time in listening to our concerns and realities and things that were going on in our schools. One of the things we found a little problematic was after that, the proposals that followed afterwards seemed narrow in scope and seemed to be like the done deal. So it seemed as though we were debating or looking at the same areas of the budget throughout the preceding meetings. So I'm not sure what, how we can change that, but that there could be more dialogue or debate or conversation around more aspects of the budget. And just, a little reminder that although it seems like it doesn't, but every aspect of the budget affects student learning or touches on student learning. Yeah, so just looking at how we can tweak that. And I know it's tricky when we have to align things with certain elements of what the ministry is looking for, but it's really complex when we don't have enough money and we're looking at ways or areas to cut that inevitably does negatively affect student learning.
Thank you, Ilda. Yeah, appreciate that. Trustee Painter, go ahead.
I appreciate it, Ilda, bringing this up. I have to admit, I've had similar thoughts in the past, and also as far as the sequence of the deliberations, for myself personally, and I don't want to generalize, but this is how I felt about it in the past, that it almost feels like we unintentionally create a bit of a crisis for ourselves with having to do trade-offs or come up with weird proposals at the 11th hour to try to avoid a deficit situation. And I really feel that perhaps we need to take another turn right from the point of departure. And so, like one, for example, and this is just throwing out a thought, would be that we base the budget solely on what our allocation is for this year. And recognizing that there may be some surplus at the end of or next year, some surplus at the end of this year that we may be able to allocate towards projects, that any project that would be supported by that funding is identified either in a district proposal or in some other way as an option, so that we see upfront, this is the level of service that we can provide without the 11th hour trauma of trying to balance the numbers. And when I use that kind of language, I want to assure the Secretary Treasurer and all of your staff that I have nothing but admiration for your ability to come in so close year after year. It's me that has the low threshold for this sort of thing. But basically, this is where our baseline funding is, based solely on what our budget expectation is for this year, the funds we will receive in this year. And then supplemental to that, proposals are laid out, and it might be custodial, it might be counseling, it might be whatever. All of the supplemental things that that are built up on top are identified at the outset. So basically, we can consider and start doing trade-offs right from the very start to understand, so that going forward, we know that we have a balanced budget and that we are making decisions based upon how much money we might have future. Those are the projects that might go forward, knowing full well that if we don't have the surplus from the end of this year, they're not going forward.
Thank you, Trustee Painter. So I'm wondering if we're starting to move into a discussion about budget information. I don't want to rush us through our discussion about budget process. Maybe there's a process piece here about sort of when we get information, like at what part of the process we start to receive information, and what that looks like, what's possible, just from a staff workload perspective. So certainly one of the things that was surfaced last time we did this, which wasn't so long ago, was you wanting to have more detailed information outside of departmental budgets. So wonderful to get district departmental budgets, but perhaps folks are wanting to see some other more detailed budget information about school-based allocations, for instance. And so I'm wondering if there's any thoughts around the timing in the process for receiving information before we move into a discussion of what information we need to help inform us. Hey, Jane, nice to see you. Go ahead.
Hi there. I'm not sure I'm going to answer the question that you just asked, but
okay.
I just wanted to say that, we absolutely appreciate being involved in the process and lending our voice when and where we can. I really like the idea you talk about the working groups, smaller committees, because I felt we did a lot of listening last year, and I'd really like to do more participating and more having discussions around some of those topics, instead of every week we'd hear different presentations. And so would like to see a little more of us talking, a little bit less listening, even though it's really important information that we all really need. And I do feel that some of the really hard information really came at that 11th hour. And if we can see a way to getting that information, a little earlier for all of us to process, and continue to have a little bit deeper discussions that we were able to have last year, because it was the 11th hour. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Jane. I appreciate that. Yeah, that's certainly in line with sort of what have we been hearing. So yeah, appreciate that. Trustee Gagnon, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. In a slightly different vein than the working groups that was described, something that I would like to see is possibly having just the individual discussions with the individual associations, So the board and yeah, the board gets together with, say, the VPVPA. Oh, I got it once. Finally got that right. And the GVTA QP with the two different QPs, like BC PAC, because there's going to be different ideas that are going to come forth to quote Gautam Khosla, getting bang for your buck. So where it's where are you going to get the most bang for your buck? And I know that that's going to be different depending on who you ask. So I'd like to be able to get those perspectives, but also keeping in mind that some of the members of the organizations report to some of the members of the other organizations. So putting them in a safe space where they're not necessarily in the same room and they're able to speak their truth without having a principal in the room or having some of the district senior leadership in the room where they may not feel as comfortable. So just allowing that openness is something that I'd like to see happen.
Thank you, Trustee Gagnon. Yeah, we've heard that a couple times tonight, so that could be certainly, if the board chose to weave that into its process, we could certainly do that. Okay, so we've got a few different ideas. Setting up meetings with individual partners on the board to create a different forum and a different space for dialogue. We've heard about some of the parts of the the previous process that worked really well and people really appreciated that we might want to repeat, such as the student symposium and potentially talking tables. We talked about the trustees doing the legwork of getting to schools and maybe to our family of schools in order to increase the opportunities, decrease the barriers for students to speak more directly to the board. Wondering then, we also talked about timing and the importance of having information at the right time and the right information. So appreciated departmental budget information and context, but I'm hearing that there's some interest in having a deeper dive and more a discussion that allows us to analyze things in more detail rather than receiving information quite as much. Do we want to, I don't want to again rush us. We are still on budget process. I'm wondering if we want to, I'm looking to the group to let me know if we're ready to move on to a discussion about budget information. Or if there's any other pieces around budget process that folks would like to share this evening. Can I just explore a little bit more this idea of working groups? So that's the only piece I would appreciate. I certainly, anyways, I'm not going to speak for my board colleagues, but I would appreciate a little bit more feedback on. So when we talked about the potential of having working groups, what we had discussed was having a group that had representatives from each of the partners and an open invitation to rights holders if they wish, but focused on particular subjects so that you could do that more deep dive into an area. So it might be on a special purpose budget and looking at allocations. It might be on capital. It might be on school-based budgets, but maybe looking at them from a level perspective. So maybe elementary school budgets, middle school budgets, high school budgets. And so having working groups focused on particular subjects. I'm wondering, and I really would hope, looking to hear from partners, if you have any views about that idea, how workable that would be for your members. If you have any thoughts about participating in a group like that, how a working group might be best structured, we'd be really interested to hear from you this evening. Hilda, go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that's a really great idea, and thinking about how we could structure that, and just for, my perspective with my members, trying to come up with those groups, perhaps like folks from the inclusive learning group. I know the counselors would have some definite ideas around the budget. Yeah, the middle schools may have some specific needs, you know, apart from secondary and elementary. So I think that's a really great idea. I think zeroing in and focusing in on some of the needs of certain groups would, I think that would work for us.
Thanks, Hilda. Yeah, I guess the idea would be that if we then have those working groups reporting back, possibly directly to the board, or maybe through the budget advisory. I mean, that's remains to be seen if we went in that direction. But it certainly would allow that more deep dive into particular areas of our budget, because it's vast, as we all know. The operating budget is huge. The special purpose budget is complex. Capital is complex. So yeah. Okay. Any other thoughts about how workable working sessions or working groups would be? Just from the partner's perspective, in your ability to have members participating in that. Yeah, I get a thumbs up from Principal Pierick. Thanks, Tina. Dr. Nimi, yeah, go ahead. Oh, sorry, did I see your hand?
Yeah, no, actually, I just have a question, I guess, in relation to that, and also just because I'm thinking of the complexity of this. So I guess I'll frame it with a question, and then I'll frame it for Indigenous education out of our special purpose grant, right? So 2 pieces, because I was just kind of listening to the conversation, and I'm thinking about, as we develop, as the board chooses, maybe if you're going to go into the working group kind of discussion around, you know, that allocation, what that expectation is going to actually look like on staff, and the additional workload that that's going to put onto us, right? Potentially, right? So kind of really navigating through who's going to be responsible for those pieces and what that might look like. So I think we really want to be clear there, because otherwise we can get ourselves into a distraction of doing other work that may not be like the focus, right? So I just want to make sure, so then that way we are keeping ourselves really kind of moving forward in a good way. And knowing that every area of the budget, there is some pieces that are just non-negotiable, right? Like, so even for Indigenous education, like we have such a set criteria of what it's to be spent on that it's actually non-negotiable, that can't be spent in other ways, right? So we have 5 specific areas that says this is what the audit criteria is for Indigenous education special purpose grant funds. And it has to be informed by Indigenous community. So I want to be like really clear with the board too, in the sense of how that would look for us in that sense, because to have advisement on that would be, our first place would be to go to Indigenous community on their advisement, right? Because that's actually what it says in the criteria of the audit for us, for our special purpose grant. So I don't also want to put a false understanding, at least on our lane for Indigenous education, what that might look like. So I'm really happy to support where the board chooses to go, but also with the understanding and the clarity of what role will that have for an expectation on community, or what role might that have for staff, and also that certain criteria is just set around what we are able to and not able to do. So I just kind of wanted to put that into the circle, so we're not leaving with a false hope, I guess.
Yeah, no, thank you, Dr. Nimi. I appreciate that. I think in terms of Indigenous education and targeted funds, and then the weaving in Bill 40 and the implications around financial planning and involving community, those are complexities and areas where we're really looking to you in order to help guide us. So, I mean, it's not the only special purpose fund. So, and there's many others, and there's other complexities. So I think I absolutely agree that working groups would have to be very clear on what the purpose is, and then be grounded with, you know, information about how the fund works, and what the rules are, and where there is flexibility, where there isn't, maybe how funds are allocated at the moment, whether there is opportunity within the rules that govern the fund to reallocate, to look at more equitable allocations. I mean, for me, that's kind of where my mind was going when it came to utilizing working groups. It may not be appropriate in your context, within your wheelhouse. I think that remains to be seen. I think the board will want to hear from community and from you about where we're at and how we proceed. So appreciate there's some complexities, and thank you for raising that here tonight. We appreciate it.
Yeah, I appreciate you holding the space for that question too. So thank you.
In terms of workload, we kind of glossed over it earlier, but obviously in terms of what is possible, that is going to be a discussion I think that needs to happen really between the board and the senior leadership team, and in particular the superintendent and secretary treasurer, because a lot of obviously the financial data, that information is not produced by us. It would be produced by the secretary treasurer and her department. So in terms of workload and what is possible, I think there's some conversations that need to occur between the board and the senior leadership team to support the process that the board decides to proceed with. So wondering, I just want to ground give us one more opportunity to talk about the process and maybe the timeline. So maybe before we go on to information and budget information, Secretary Treasurer, may I ask you to just sort of walk us through the timeline? I know we had already started, or I think we had started within the next couple of days in terms of last year's process. We had already passed a process, I think in September as a board. And so we are a little bit behind this year. And so we're keen to apply ourselves to the timelines this year and maybe ground our conversation before moving on to budget information.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Last year, the former Secretary Treasurer had put forward the budget process at the end of September, which was approved by the board. A media release went out shortly thereafter. The first Budget Advisory Committee meeting was set for November 10th. And so, as you know, we had a new board, a new Secretary Treasurer a couple days prior to that. So then the Budget Advisory Committee meetings, they started off that they weren't quite as often. So there was one, so November 10th, then there was one on December 8th. Then of course, we had the talking tables in early January and followed by the student symposium. In January, on January 19th, another Budget Advisory Committee meeting, February 9th, and we started to see them sort of double up like every couple of weeks. So February 9th, 23rd, March 2nd, and then we had a public meeting in between that one and March 9th. March 14th is when the Budget Advisory Committee made its presentations to the board. Then there was a feedback period from the public from March 7th to 17th. And the first, we also had a spring break in there. So the first reading, I think it was just the first reading was April 4th. And then the second and third reading was on April 6th. So it is really tight when you get like into February, it's a sprint really to the end. So I think I agree, like if we can put some more meetings up front. Some of the feedback we received from the Budget Advisory Committee were that then like a 2-hour meeting talking about budget is long. And so maybe to shorten it up so that it's not quite so long, and or maybe more frequent meetings, like maybe they are every 2 weeks, but maybe it doesn't have to be everybody who's on there. We, for this year that's coming up, we do have a set deadline. Again, it's through our collective agreement and the mobility rounds and staffing. So you might see if you look at other school districts that they stretch out their budget approval process into June. We don't have that luxury. So we need to have our budget approved ideally by, I kind of picked a Thursday because I don't think anyone really would want to do it on a Friday night, but April 11th is sort of where I'm saying. So maybe a little bit longer than last year, a few days. And then April 9th could be the first reading. Some things that I like personally would like to get some feedback on around the timeline is the student feedback. Ideally, we would like to put that out front because that's who we're serving, and their voice is really important in this process. And so having that feedback right up front and guiding us through this is something that we were hoping that we could do maybe in early January. We also talked about the meeting with the public and how we put forward hypothetical questions. So we were talking about, what do you feel if after spring break, the week prior to the board looking at the first bylaw reading, is to present the actual options to the public to get feedback on what we're actually looking at doing instead of something that's hypothetical. So that's a thought or curiosity that I would have. And then the stakeholder, like the talking tables as well. Obviously very well liked by our education partners. How would you feel if these were real items that were on the table as opposed to hypothetical? So all of those things could shift the timeline because we need to be further out, like closer to March and April to sort of get there. I think we have a lot of work to do before then. Or do we want to get feedback from education partners through individual meetings in advance and then come together at the end for that important conversation at the table? Yeah, lots of questions. So I appreciate any feedback that you have to provide on that, but I think the most important thing is we need to have it done by April 11th. We don't get our funding announcement until March 15th. That's something else to keep in mind. So we're really just going on Julie and her vendors, like amazing work that they do in estimating and giving us, where we're at financially without really having all of the information. So we just have to bear that in mind, that there could be changes that come up when we get our funding announcement. Hopefully good ones, but that's not always the case. So I don't know if that answers your question.
It does. No, that was perfect. Thank you so much. That really helped. Exactly what I was hoping for was just to let everyone know where we are in terms of timelines, in particular, as you say, those April deadlines, so that we can honor the staffing processes in a timely manner. So yeah, it also I think helps the board to know where we may want to schedule those one-to-one meetings with partners, and perhaps earlier, as you say, in the process. Interesting. I like what I'm hearing in terms of the option of having real options on the tables when we're doing the talking table discussions. That's a very interesting idea, given some of the feedback that we've heard this evening about folks wanting to have an opportunity to dive more into an analysis of the possibilities rather than possibilities or options coming up at the final hour around the board table during approval. So very interesting. Want to open up again the floor to partners who may have some thoughts about some of the questions and options, ideas that the Secretary Treasurer just presented. Any thoughts at this stage? Okay, if not, we'll let that settle. Can have a think about that. And if anything comes up as we proceed through our next discussion at B2 about budget information, then just let me know. We can always backtrack. So I think subject to my colleagues' direction, I think that this sort of committee of the whole seems to be working quite well for our purposes this evening. So I would suggest that we stay in the committee of the whole through item B2. Subject to consensus around the table. If I hear otherwise, then we'll consider moving out of committee of the whole. Okay, all right, I'll take the silence as agreement that we should stay in committee of the whole. Okay, so we're now at B2. So the idea again around this item was just to give us an opportunity to surface some ideas, some thoughts around budget information, potentially budget, like timing of budget information, and go from there. So any thoughts about budget information? What information we need to help ground our decision making when we need it? So I know we talked about maybe moving away a little bit from departmental budgets, not that we don't need them, we need them, but maybe not receiving them in a presentation style, but maybe just receiving that information in a pack-up for everyone to read and digest, and creating some more space for analysis of information, potentially in smaller working groups with specific topics assigned to them. And, you know, so folks spoke to the need for those working groups, if that's how we proceed, to have clarity of purpose, to understand the context with which they are analyzing and potentially providing recommendations. So in terms of the information, what I'm hearing is that there may be some interest in having more detailed information. So information about budget allocations, maybe some formulas. So how decisions about budget allocations are made, if there are formulas or rules surrounding allocations, that those be presented. Trustee Painter, go ahead.
One of the things I would also like to understand is the level of service that is being delivered to schools based on the budget allocations. It's one thing to say, you know, we have a ratio, or, you know, at a department level where we've got this much money we're putting into literacy was an example last year. But that literacy funding is distributed specifically to different schools to meet key needs. And yet, if we look at that as, you know, in a presentation, that money is tied to a department, when in actuality, it's being delivered in a school. And for me, that it would help to understand the services that are being delivered. And I understand it's an incredibly complex thing, so I don't have an idea right now about how to streamline that, but that would help me. Counseling services is one that we constantly hear about, but I don't know how it plays out on the ground in the schools. Custodial, things like that. I would also be interested to know where funding is tied to, for example, master agreement between the district and teachers, or CUPE, where we have made hard commitments that there must be this much money in a certain pot, and distinguish what is, and I caution using this term, but discretionary, where we actually get to make a choice about the funds in a given, however they're allocated, so that we're conscious about where we don't have a choice, where we have to do something, and where we have a choice to establish priorities, or to reallocate, or to simply confirm that this is the best use possible.
Yeah, thanks, Trustee Painter. So yeah, you'd want us to have information that takes note of, or makes note of, any contractual commitments and so on, where there may not be, flexibility. Okay, yeah, no, fair enough. And that's certainly, I mean, I agree. I think from my own perspective, it would be great to see that connection, that alignment between departmental budgets, for instance, and then the services that are actually received within schools. And again, if we're going to look at equity and whether there's room for or possibility out there to reallocate or redistribute in a more equitable fashion, then I don't see how we can do that devoid of any understanding of how it's actually woven in or allocated out to schools. Trustee Kwan, go ahead.
Thanks. Yeah, it occurs to me that, you know, if we're looking at kind of the process that we want to do, you know, that if we wanted to look at school-based budgets, you know, perhaps a really good time to have some of that information would be when we're meeting with VP, VPA, and being able to discuss some of the impacts of how those budgets work, and, you know, really see the impacts of what's happening in schools with regards to those budgets. I think that would be really helpful, at least for myself.
No, thanks, Trustee Kwan. Appreciate that. timing is of the essence, isn't it? In terms of, having the right information in our hands to help ground conversations for sure. And then we come back to that age-old dilemma of there's the perfect timing, and then there's the realities of the world we live in, and obviously the constraints of available resources to put that information together. So I'm wondering, trustees, as we talk through what information is needed, I'm wondering if we want to, once we have concluded our committee of the whole discussion, if we need to give some kind of direction to allow some dialogue and moving this forward in terms of the information piece. So I'm just going to put that out there and let you think about that for a moment while we continue our conversation about what information is needed. Any other thoughts from our partners about information that you folks think would be helpful, necessary to help the board make its budgetary decisions for 2024-25? Dr. Nimi, go ahead.
Sure. Thank you, Chair. Not that I'm wanting to add additional workload, but I do think that this may be helpful for the board in consideration. As I'm thinking through, I was just listening to your response about when you're going out to meet with other groups. The question goes, is that sometimes as maybe trustees or in governance, you may not know what you don't know in questions that guide you to ask questions. So the part that I was thinking through is that would it be helpful, and I don't want to speak on behalf of other departments, I'm only going to speak on behalf of ours as Indigenous education, but maybe to put forward some guiding or considered questions that you may want to solicit and ask, right? Because if you're not seeing it from that worldview and you don't have the purview there, then what would be helpful for you to be able to garner those questions of understanding, right? And so that might be where we would be able to be helpful as Indigenous education to say, here's some guiding questions or considerations from these particular questions that you may want to consider asking, which would help you guide and collect some of that narrative where we're not collecting that for you, but you're collecting that, but we're giving you some points to maybe, lean into where you may not have that purview. And I don't know if that would be helpful for other departments, and I don't want to speak on behalf or put that onto them, but I think from our lane, looking at it from an Indigenous education lane, if you were to meet with, say principals, vice principals, would you have that purview? I'm not sure, right? But how can we be helpful? So I would like to put that onto the table and into the circle just as a consideration.
Thank you, Dr. Nimi. No, we appreciate the offer to help educate us and to ground us so that we can engage in those discussions in a meaningful way with the knowledge that we need. And I appreciate that you can't and wouldn't commit your colleagues. Okay, so any other thoughts about budget information that folks think is important for us as a board to be considering in our decision-making for 2024-25 budget? Oh, Jane, I just wanted to let you know that you're not muted. I don't know, Josh, if we can mute Jane, just in case she's having a private conversation, doesn't want it streamed on YouTube. Thank you. Ilda, go ahead.
Thank you. Yes, just thinking about what aspects of the budget information that we need. I think looking at every item in the budget, all the line items, every parts of the budget, including the ones that are special purpose grants, that's great. We know that, those ones have less flexibility or have, a special purpose for them, but just to inform us as to what the whole budget is, and just to help us with the decision. I just found last year it was really, really narrow. Like we got some information from some parts of the budget, and then when the proposals came through, it was very narrow in scope, and just the same proposals over and over. And there really wasn't, we didn't know where to look or what else we could do, what other options there were, because we hadn't seen the whole budget. So for me, I'd like the big picture, like where does all the money lie and what are all of the options?
Yeah, thanks, Ilda. Any other comments or ideas around budget information? Okay. I'm going to suggest then we may have reached our saturation of budget discussions, which is fine. There's a lot, right? There's a lot of moving parts. There's some complexities certainly here. My suggestion would be that colleagues, that we potentially move out of a committee of the whole and maybe look to provide some general direction to allow us to move the informational piece forward at least. While we're formulating and considering what we've heard tonight around process. But while we do that, I guess from a timing perspective, I know we need to come to some kind of decision as a board about how the process is going to look this year. So we really appreciate everyone's contribution around the table tonight. It's going to certainly help us as we make decisions, and we're certainly going to have to make some of those decisions relatively quickly. We'll have to discuss with the senior leadership team when those decisions come to the board meeting, whether those can come at the end of the month or not. But yeah, just want to provide one more opportunity before we move out of committee of the whole for our partners around the table this evening to offer any thoughts or contributions. And it doesn't just need to be on budget information. If you did have any final thoughts on budget process that you wanted to share, please feel free to do so. Okay, hearing none, I'm going to move to my colleague, Trustee Gagnon. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. I was just hoping to kind of garner a general feedback of, like, with the Budget Advisory Committee last year, do we want to see a repetition of that general process? Like thumbs up, thumbs down, do the different partners think that was good? Or do we want to scrap that general idea and go into more just individual working groups? But yeah, I just want to see if they thought that was good, but just with some adaptations.
Yeah, okay, no, good question. Thanks, Trustee Gagnon. Before we move out of committee of the whole, does anybody have any thoughts about whether we want to proceed with some kind of a budget advisory group process, or if we want to depart from that? If there's any thoughts whatsoever, please feel free to put them out there. It'll help the board to decide how we want to proceed. And if you don't, that is fine as well. We appreciate your feedback. Okay. Oh, Ilda, go ahead.
Okay, so I'm going to say we like the talking tables.
Okay, fair enough.
Yes, and then the rest of the process just seemed, from our perspective, that it was a done deal and there wasn't a lot of opportunity to look at other things or allocating the budget in other ways. I'm very intrigued by the working group concept, getting some feedback from folks of the different groups, the students, the different different groups here and different folks, and looking at the whole budget, coming up with proposals, and then an opportunity to look at those proposals for further feedback and seeing if, because, sometimes you get some information from different groups, but then putting it together and looking at the whole picture, sometimes you get a different perspective or, another idea, and having an opportunity to say, oh, on second thought, that's actually going to impact this group here, unintended consequences. Maybe there's there's some work that we can do around that.
Thank you, Ilda. Appreciate your candor. Okay, so I'm going to suggest that we, trustees, that we move out of committee of the whole, unless there are any other partners that would like to just speak in the more informal setting. And then, but if not, then I'm going to suggest that we move out of committee of the whole. Trustee McNally, thank you. Are you moving that motion? No? Okay. Yeah, go ahead. What's that, Trustee McNally?
Sorry, I'd like to talk. I've always been super daunted by the budget. Everybody, you know, knows that. If there's any old timers here, it's like, yeah, I should know that, and I don't. I just find it overwhelming to think of all the, as Hilda just said, all the interlocking aspects of it. And moving some money here means, you know, it came from somewhere else. One time, another trustee and I asked for the line item budget, and we were fought. We were fought, and we insisted, and we got it. And it's not something you can just take away and figure out on your own. There's a key to it. And our secretary treasurer at the time kindly sat down with us and probably took 2 hours of her busy day to explain to us what it was, how it worked, and it was basically every cent that the district works with. But on the one hand, I think if I don't have that and work at that level, I can't really do anything meaningful. On the other hand, if I have that level of information, I'm paralyzed because there's too much of it and I don't have the big picture of how it all works together. So that is a really unhelpful comment from me. I'm looking forward to how this plays out if we're going to do it differently. And, you know, there's that saying, start with the end in mind. And maybe one of the things, I don't think we have, like, I think we have an appallingly small contingency fund. Something like, what do we wind up with, 1.3 million? Anyway, it's not much. To start with the end in mind and, you know, ask, what does it look like at the end? That we have no surplus, or that we save it all, or, you know, that was one of the questions in the budget committee groups, I think. Anyway, I find it all terrifying. Thanks for listening.
Thanks, Trustee McNally. Well, don't, you're not in it alone. So just that would be my advice, is remember, we're in it together. We've got a lot of, you know, very committed, intelligent, and willful folks around our tables. And yeah, so I'm optimistic that when we work together and collaborate, we're going to find some solutions and some interesting options. But yeah, there's no denying that the system is strained and there is never enough resources to go around. And so all the more reason to have these difficult conversations, and maybe to do a little bit more analysis and deep thinking by reference to more detailed budgetary information. Trustee Painter, I saw your hand. Go ahead.
I just wanted to offer that I like the idea of the working groups, and one possible option to address that challenge of unintended consequences is to have a very well-defined central hub for information. So, for example, every department budget is clearly identified in one spot and is easily accessed. It's not in a presentation and you have to remember what day the meeting was on. And this is not to disparage what has been done in the past. I've just found that it was very difficult to go back and find particular information in the way that we had it structured. But if we do have it structured very thoughtfully, where we have our base information up front, where we have perhaps even a template for the meeting notes with recommendations coming out of each of the working group sessions, so that we can have things very clearly defined, try to answer something every day. Or, either we answer something or we come up with a new question, but it's very clear what the outcome of a meeting is. So that as we go forward, we're actually creating the building blocks for a larger conversation. There's still going to be a bit of mashing together at the end, but I think that there's a way that we can move forward so that all of the information is readily available to all the participants, so that we can keep track of what's going on right across the board from the start of the process to the end of the process.
Thank you, Trustee Painter. Okay. All right. So one final call, just again to allow some space for our partners around the table. If you do wish to share anything else this evening around budget process or budget information. And if not, then I'm going to ask one of my colleagues to move us out of committee of the whole. Okay, all right. I just want to say thank you very much. We really, really appreciate your candor and your willingness to contribute to help guide us in our decision-making around this. So thank you so much. And I think we're all looking forward to having more conversations over the coming months. So trustees, may I have a mover to move us out of committee of the whole? Thank you, Trustee Bayo. And a seconder? Trustee Pinelli, thank you. Any discussion? All right, all those in favor with a show of hands. Okay, so we're out of committee of the whole. So we're back to our usual board process. Now I'm minded that there is a lot of work to do. There's some dialogue that we need to have as a board with our senior leadership team about how we might progress some of this work and come to some decisions about process, but also about information. I'm wondering if there's anything we can move forward this evening in terms of direction. In particular, what I've got in mind is budgetary information, because I think we're going to have to start to give some direction sooner rather than later. And I think to do that, I think we're going to need to have some flexibility and some dialogue. So yeah, would be interested in the board's direction on that. Yeah, Trustee Kwan, go ahead.
Well, I just wonder if it would be good to just give, some high level, like a very flexible kind of direction as to how to move forward. And so, my suggestion might be that, we just, we direct perhaps the chair and the superintendent and secretary treasurer and perhaps, myself or someone else, to work on what that looks like. I don't know.
In terms of budget information or budget process and information?
I think probably both, but I think, the process, it sounds like, we've had a lot of talk about that. And so, I'm just curious as to, I'd love to hear kind of what my colleagues think, as well as, senior leadership team as to what is needed in this circumstance, I guess.
Yeah, no, thanks, Trustee Kwan. I appreciate that. Yeah, we're going to need to get to the point where really by the end of the month, we have some proposal to bring forward for our consideration so we can get moving. Yeah. Trustee Gagnon, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. It's not really a proposal, but it's more of a hypothetical of looking at possibly requesting departmental budgets or proposals, but it would have to be like preliminary. I don't expect them to come out and be like, this is what our budget could be. It's not to me feasible at this stage, but kind of getting that overview of like, these are our contractual obligations and these are our want to haves, and like, so if we can get that kind of wish list from the different departments as early as possible, I think that would be helpful for us.
Thank you, Trustee Gagnon. Any other thoughts about information and timing? I think there needs to be some dialogue about timing and what's possible. And Yeah, so I don't know if we can really do that around this table. I think there needs to be possibly some dialogue behind the scenes. I appreciate Trustee Kwan, your suggestion that possibly as the board's representatives, we go and we engage with our senior leadership team about that, and then bring some proposals back to the board. We are short on time. Trustee McNally, go ahead.
I have a feeling, and not often do I have a feeling that a motion is premature, but I think, I don't think we're ready to make a motion about anything tonight. Any motion that we could make, just sounds like it's pretty vague. So I believe I'm hearing meeting behind the scenes and getting some idea of what's possible, in terms of timelines and information,
Yeah,
is the way to go. And I'd rather gather that information first and make a motion when we have more information.
yeah, no, I think really what I'm looking for is whether the board wants to give me direction by motion to do that work, or whether I should just go ahead and do that work to bring it together into a board agenda for the board's consideration at the end of the month. So just really looking to get some direction, yeah, from my colleagues. Yeah, Trustee McNally, go ahead. Oh, sorry.
I'll make that motion if you can
Okay.
word it.
Okay, yeah, yeah, Trustee Kwan, did you want to second it, or did you have some suggestions for wording?
I think Trustee Kwan already did.
Okay, yeah, go ahead, Trustee Kwan.
Yeah, so I was thinking something along the lines of, I guess we would direct the superintendent, we wouldn't direct the board chair, or can we do either?
You can direct me, absolutely.
Yeah, so direct the board chair to work with the superintendent. We can add others in there if we want, kind of to prepare some 2024-25 budget information for the board. Just a high level kind of direction so that we don't have to continue. Like, I think if we continue in this fashion, it's going to slow down the process. So I think that might speed things up. So I'm happy to move that motion if there's any amendments of who you'd like to add in there. At this point, I have the board chair and the superintendent. I can put it in the chat if you'd like, if that's easier.
That would be great. Thanks, Trustee Kwan. And then I'll be looking for a seconder. But I'll just let Trustee Kwan have, oh, thank you, Trustee Gagnon. Appreciate that. Okay, so I'll just give Trustee Kwan a moment.
Sorry, it won't let me. It's only letting me give it to Josh. So I will read it out again, perhaps, that the Board of Education of the School District 61, Greater Victoria, direct the board chair to work with the superintendent to prepare I got to get there. You're right. 2024, 2025 is the budget we're working on. Information. So budget information for the board.
Can I just suggest, Trustee Kwan, would you mind just sending it to Josh, and then I'll ask Josh to send it on to everyone?
Sure. Yeah.
I think he has the
sure, yeah.
permission to do that. Yeah. Thank you.
And Trustee Kwan, are you going to email directly to me?
I think Trustee Kwan can put it in the chat.
In the chat? Okay.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
We can send you things in the chat, just not everyone. Superintendent, sorry, yeah. I almost missed you, but yeah, thank you for waving. Go ahead when you're ready.
Thank you. Just wondering if it would be possible to add the process piece to this. So it would be both the process and the information.
Thank you, Superintendent. Yeah, great suggestion. That would be very helpful. So maybe when we get it in the chat for everyone to have a look, we can then look to potential amendments. Okay, thank you very much, Trustee Kwan and Josh. Appreciate that. Okay, so we've got that the Board of Education of School District number 61, Greater Victoria, direct the chair to work with the superintendent to prepare the 2024-2025 budget information for the board. So we're suggesting that budget information and process for the board. So I think is really the amendment. And if I may also suggest that the vice chair also be directed to work with me to do that, to bring it back to the board. And also wondering whether the board wants to consider moving an amendment to give us a timeline. And so does anyone want to move any of those amendments? Yeah, Trustee Painter, go ahead.
Certainly, I would move to amend to identify prepare 2024-2025 budget information process and or proposed budget information process and timeline for the board. I would appreciate, I think Superintendent or Secretary Treasurer might have a better idea about the art of the possible about it. A meeting date that we could have this ready by, like, is December legitimate?
Through the chair, we were really hoping to have a draft process and information for the November 27th meeting.
Perfect. That's why I wanted to ask.
Yeah, no, we've got to get moving. So appreciate that confirmation, Secretary Treasurer. Thanks for asking the question, Trustee Painter. Okay, we just back up to the motion, folks? I just want to clarify. So what will come through, in terms of, well, let's first see if there's any other, well, I would like to clarify one thing. Okay, so in terms of process, so undoubtedly we need to have a proposal on the process coming through. We've talked about the November board, so that's super helpful. I suggest that someone move a complete amendment that addresses all of those things so that we can move this along a little bit more efficiently. But I'll come back to that in a minute. And then I just want to clarify the intention here. So we want to come back with a budget process proposal for the board's consideration. However, there's going to be a need for ongoing discussion as we work through that around what information we need. So like, I don't know, I don't think that's going to come back in terms of just sort of like a proposal. I think it's going to be some ongoing work that we're going to need to do in order to support the process that we decide on. So I just want to kind of manage expectations. I don't think it's realistic for the superintendent and I to, and collaborating with the Secretary Treasurer to come back with an exhaustive list of all the information. I think it's going to depend partly on the process the board chooses. So I would like to be able to start the discussions with the superintendent about what information we would need, so that staff have the benefit of being able to kind of consider the workload implications of that. So Trustee Painter, would you mind, I know you've moved a motion, we haven't seconded it, and I would really appreciate if we try to efficiently work together to layer in all the amendments so we can get this done. So
You bet.
thanks. Okay, so go ahead, Trustee Painter.
Might I offer, as a second motion, I think it'd be easier this way. But to address what you were just speaking to, I would suggest that we set up a timeline for all the parties here and our rights holders not in attendance to have an opportunity to, say, email the chair and superintendent their wish list or their recommendations by a certain date so that you have that information available. And that this would help to basically identify what the wants are out of this group. We've had some general conversation, but I don't think it's been specific enough to really support you.
Okay, so let's just focus on this on the motion, folks. So because there's going to be opportunities for partners to weigh in, not least at the end of the month. So let's just, if you don't mind, let's just look at the motion. We want to layer in the budget process and information for the board by the November board meeting. And do we also want to layer in the board chair and vice chair? That would be my suggestion, so we can get this motion moved. Everything else I think is going to come, but yeah, Trustee Kwan, go ahead.
Thanks. Yeah, I just I took the amendments that Trustee Painter suggested and sent them to Josh. So I don't know if we're amenable, he could post that again and just see if that encompasses what we were looking for.
That would be great. Thank you. Okay, so it reads that the Board of Education of School District number 61, Greater Victoria, direct the board chair to work with superintendent and the vice chair to prepare 2024-25 budget information process and timeline for the board by November regular board meeting. That works, in my view. I'll move it. We'll look for a seconder and then we'll move into some discussion. Do I have a seconder to move that amendment? Trustee Bio, thank you. All right. Any discussion about the amendments to the motion? Trustee Painter.
To clarify that the board only directs the superintendent, and the superintendent is free to bring the secretary treasurer, associate secretary treasurer, and all the other key financial people to the meeting?
I would expect so. Work can't get done without them, so I would say that's a given. But yeah, thanks for the clarification. Okay. Any other discussion? Okay, hearing none, we're voting on the amendment. All those in favor of the amendment to the motion? And that is unanimous. Thanks, folks. Okay, so we have a motion as amended. Do we need me to read it one more time, or are we all solid on what it says? Okay. All right, so I'm going to call the question. All those in favor of the amended motion? And that is unanimous. All right, thanks, folks. Appreciate the direction. I think that's going to help us move things forward in a timely and efficient manner to the November board. All right, and thank you again to our partners around the table and staff. I really appreciate you sharing with us tonight. It's most appreciated. We're moving on in our agenda to C. I'm going to turn things over to the Secretary Treasurer to walk us through the memo that was provided in the pack-up. Secretary Treasurer, whenever you're ready.
Yes, thank you, Chair. What we have in our agenda package today is a statutory right-of-way, specifically for BC Hydro and TELUS at 1211 Gladstone. If you're not familiar with that address, it's actually part of the Caledonia project that is beside Vic High School. Because of the ministerial order and our policies and regulations, we've taken a look, because this is an SRW, a statutory right-of-way, which we call an SRW, or also known as an easement. The ministerial order that requires community consultation, ministerial approval does not apply. Easements are exempt from that. Our policy and regulation also reflects the same language, that easements are not subject to that. However, because the statutory right-of-way, even for BC Hydro and TELUS, is granting an interest in our land, essentially what happens is that on our land title, there's a charge that goes against it for this statutory right-of-way. And so as a result, the board has to grant a disposal right-of-way bylaw with 3 readings in order to dispose of that statutory right-of-way. So included in the agenda package, there's an agreement that's associated with the statutory right-of-way. Our legal counsel has advised that this agreement is standard. So it's a standard form that BC Hydro and TELUS would use for a statutory right-of-way of this kind. And also included in the agenda package is the land title documents, which includes the transfer from the school district to BC Hydro and TELUS, a description of the lot that it's located on. And then there's also a map that shows the lot and a square that's marked on there, which shows where the statutory right-of-way is. I was able to receive information from CRHC. If you're not familiar with this property, we actually own the land, but we've leased it to CRHC for over 60 years for this building project. So CRHC has confirmed that the size of that statutory right-of-way is 60 square meters. And if anyone works in square feet, that's about 646 square feet. What else? There's also a full bylaw in there that has all of the legal language included in it. In the memo is a shortened version of the bylaw, which as long as every trustee has a copy of the full one, the shorter version can be read out in lieu. So when you're doing 3 readings of a large bylaw like that, that is helpful. It does require, bylaws do require 3 readings in approval to do 3 readings in 1 meeting. And so the board would need to either agree to do 3 readings up front or do 2 readings and then agree to do the 3rd reading in the same meeting in order for this to be carried this evening. I think that's all of the information that I have up front, but happy to try and answer your questions if you have any.
Thank you, Secretary Treasurer. Okay, so initially what I'm going to do is open the floor up to questions that folks have about the memo and the information in that. Trustees, does anyone have any questions? Trustee Kwan, go ahead.
Thank you. I was curious about, it's really difficult to tell from the map that's included with the agreement. I was just curious where that statutory right of way for BC Hydro and TELUS actually falls in relation to everything else, you know, with regards to the CHRC building and the turf and the volleyball courts and Vic High. I was just curious where that falls. That would, you know, yeah, I think it would be really good information to have as far as where it actually is situated.
Thank you, Trustee Kwan. Secretary Treasurer, are you able to provide that clarity? We've got the square footage, so that's helpful. Yeah.
Yeah, I think if you're looking at that map and you're looking at that long rectangle lot, which is the Caledonia project, right beside, well, actually, if you have been there at all, that land right there is actually just a pile of dirt. It's not a building yet. The buildings are on the other side, the buildings that have been built so far. And right beside there is the artificial turf field and also the volleyball courts. I'm not sure where the tennis courts are. I don't remember where those are, but it's basically the school field butts up against the Caledonia project. So if you've been there, there's that little parking lot that you park in. And then if you look straight across from that parking lot across the volleyball courts, it's almost directly across from that in that Caledonia lot.
Trustee Kwan, go ahead.
Yeah, so I guess in relation to the lots, it's difficult for me to to picture. I kind of have an idea, but you know, I'm curious, like, for example, on that map is section 49, the turf, and then section 54, the 2 sections, the volleyball courts. Like, whereabouts is this approximately? Is the Caledonia project lot A sections 50 and 53, or is it more you know, the VIP 205 lot 10 and 12? Like, I'm just curious as to, you know, exactly where everything sits. Sorry.
No problem, Trustee Kwan. We want to be clear before we consider disposing of any kind of part of our land. So yeah, thanks for the question. Secretary Treasurer, go ahead when you're ready. And then Trustee Painter, I see your hand.
Thank you, through the chair. Please correct me if I'm misunderstanding your question, but so if you're looking at the map, the lot A sections 50 and 53, Spring Ridge, Victoria City District, that long skinny rectangle, that is all the land that we've leased to CRHC for the Caledonia project. The other lots that are showing as individual, that is the Vic High lands. So right, section 49, section 48 would be the artificial turf field would be there. Yeah, I'm not even sure where the school starts on that. We'd have to probably look at a land title map where you could see where the buildings are with the lots, but I believe there's over 40 lots that are in that area. So there's quite a few separate lots that Vic High sits on.
Trustee Painter and then Trustee Gagnon.
I was just going to offer that I found it useful for my own orientation to focus on the streets on the at the top of the map. So North Park, Vining, the one that's not listed is Caledonia and Gladstone. So if you look at where the square is, it's immediately adjacent to the side of the Caledonia lot where houses, where private houses abut. That's what we're looking at in those you know, vertically oriented little squares. So this is on the opposite side of the Caledonia footprint from the parking lot, the Vic High track meet or track, etc. And just below where it says approximate location of the area of the works, you'll see a very skinny horizontal lot identified, for lack of a better term. And perhaps Secretary Treasurer could confirm with me, that's the part of the right-of-way, green space, whatever, that was returned to the city. So that gives you a sense of that's the buffer line where Caledonia abuts the school parking lot.
Thank you, Trustee Painter. I'm just going to turn to the Secretary Treasurer just to confirm whether, well, to confirm Trustee Painter's question. Is Trustee Painter correct in his explanation?
I'm not actually sure about where the other statutory right-of-way was located. I do believe that it's directly in between Caledonia property and the school district. So if he's talking about the tiny, like the really skinny line that runs through, correct me if I'm wrong, but all I know is that the other statutory right-of-way for the access is between the Caledonia lot and the school district, like the Vic High property. The parking lot, I believe, is further down because there are volleyball courts that are between the parking lot and the Caledonia lot. We're talking about the parking lot that's right beside the garden, right beside Fairy Tech. It's a little bit further over because there are sports amenities that are between that parking lot and the Caledonia lot.
Okay. I'm going to go to Trustee Gagnon, and then I think we have to come back to where this is. Okay, Trustee Gagnon, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Just to try and help provide further context, the map on page 35 says that north is up on that page. That is not true. North is, you would have to rotate it left 90 degrees because we're actually facing west if you're looking up the page. Like, just to kind of make things contextually a little more gray, like Gladstone Avenue, which in our page right now is on the right hand side, is on the north side of the Vic High site. So the whole orientation of the page is off, and north is not where it says north is.
Maybe that's causing part of the confusion as to where this actually is. Okay, thank you, Trustee Gagnon. I appreciate both you and Trustee Painter trying to assist us to confirm where this actually is. Secretary Treasurer, would you, so I think so there's clarity around kind of where this actually is. And then I think the second thing, like as I read through everything again, one of the things I wondered was whether we're clear on the necessity of having this be a permanent statutory right of way. So I appreciate that this is required to support the development of the property and the lease between the Capital Regional Housing Corporation and the Board of Education. And I appreciate that's a 62-year lease. And I also note from the agreement in the pack-up that if either BC Hydro or TELUS no longer require the use of the right-of-way, that they are committed to removing it, with the exception of anything that was placed below ground. And so the ownership of that, it looks like, of any kind of below ground infrastructure that they put in, I guess, would revert. Well, depends on the scenario, but may well end up with the board. And so I'm wondering, after 62 years, and let's assume we want to use this land or the adjacent land for educational purposes, and we want to develop that, or let's assume maybe we want to develop the land that is adjacent to the CRHC development before 62 years. Have we engaged in an analysis of how these works will impact our ability to develop the land now or after the lease has expired?
I did have a conversation with our legal counsel regarding what might happen after the 62-year lease with these works. Not so much about the removal of them, but whether or not the charge could be discharged from land title at that point, to which he confirmed that generally after 62 years, if they're not needed anymore for doing something different with that property, that the board could proceed to have it discharged from title.
That's helpful. I'm just wondering, if that's the case, why we wouldn't build that into the agreement. So I think the wording is, let me just sort of go back up, forever, I think is the wording used. So rather blunt, but it's on page 27 of the pack up under grant a statutory right of way at 2.1. It says the owner grants separately to each of BC Hydro and TELUS forever the right of statutory right of way. And so I'm wondering, do we want to be more specific? Because I guess from my perspective anyways, I'm wondering, if we have above ground works and then below ground works, I see that there's a commitment in the agreement for them to remove the above ground works. We might well be left with below ground works. I don't know if that would have any impact whatsoever on our ability to develop the land for educational purposes, but I certainly would want to know that. And I'm wondering whether or not, we need to be specific in the agreement rather than saying forever. We say, look, we understand this access is needed to support the development. That development is subject to a 62-year lease, and just be clear that at that point we want some commitments that it'll be removed from the title. Just wondering if you have any thoughts, Secretary Treasurer, or if Council had any thoughts on that.
We didn't have a conversation about adding that in. I think basically what he said is that this is a very ordinary statutory right of way, that the documents that are here are the standard documents that they would use for a statutory right of way for a development project. And so I know the conversation had come up around the possibility of a license, which is stays with the current owner. BC Hydro and TELUS have not gone that way before. They go with the SRW. So my gut feeling, and it may not be right, is that they're not going to put an out in the SRW after 62 years, but could take it to legal counsel to ask that question. I'm not sure how else to answer that. I don't have the information.
Yeah, no, fair enough. No, I appreciate that. Thank you, Secretary Treasurer. Colleagues, yeah, Trustee Kwan, go ahead.
Thanks. Yeah. And I guess the last question I have is, I think with disposals at least, or perhaps maybe it's just land sales. I'm just wondering how, sections 98 of the School Act would govern this, because I mean, normally it's to do with joint use. And I think in this case, it's not. So I just wondered, around that, whether we're following the School Act and complying within that, that section.
Thank you, Trustee Kwan. Secretary Treasurer, are you able to address that question?
I'm sorry, I'm not sure what the reference is to section 98 around joint use agreements. We have a lease agreement with CRHC for 62 years, so joint use agreement doesn't apply in this situation. Yeah, so I'm not sure what your question is around section 98.
Trustee Kwan, did you want to clarify? Go
Sorry,
ahead.
yeah, I'll clarify. I'm sorry if I'm being not very clear. I guess the question here is that it's not like the agreement that we're making is not with CHRC, so it's not a lease, it's a disposal. We're adding other people to the title. So I mean, I don't even know if section 98 does apply, but I was just curious, because it's not with CHRC and it's with someone else, whether and it's a disposal of land, whether that section does apply.
Thank you, Trustee Kwan. Secretary Treasurer, go ahead when you're ready.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, okay, I think that makes more sense. So we are following all of the ministerial requirements around disposal of land in this case. So section 98 refers to the acquisition and disposal of land. There is a ministerial order around disposal of land. Easements and SRWs are not under that. So there is a guideline that goes along with the ministerial order, and it very specifically states that an easement, an SRW, also any lease that's less than 10 years would be exempt from that.
Thank you, Trustee Kwan. Thank you, Secretary Treasurer. I just had one more question, Secretary Treasurer, just about, again, like the detail of the agreement. I think there's a section, let me just find it. Apologies, bear with me a second. It talks about placement of the works. And I believe the wording is, what basically just sort of gives BC Hydro and TELUS, I think, just sort of the right to kind of decide where they want to place the works. I'm wondering if there was discussion about where the works are placed and whether we've done, again, our own sort of assessment of whether that the siting is, works for us. Like, I guess because we're not really 100% sure where this is, I guess I'm having a little difficulty knowing if we should be concerned at all about our ability to develop the land at 1211 Gladstone and not be impeded by this works. Is it possible to sort of clarify that for us tonight?
The only conversation that we had around this, the area of the works, is that initially it wasn't specified on the map that it was across the entire lot. And so our legal counsel had been working with CRHC to define this specific spot of the works. I would think that when they were creating their plans for their development, that this would have been part of those plans. So and where the placement of the buildings are and all of that. So I don't think that we would have discretion as to where those works would be located at this point. And I can't really speak to the future, like in 62 years, if that's a good spot for us for what our plans might be that far in the future. Difficult to say.
Yeah, no, thanks, Secretary Treasurer. And to be clear, my point is that I'm wondering, like, before the 62 years, if we wanted to develop that or use it for educational purposes, would the siting of the works interfere with our ability to do that, let alone after 62 years? But just to be specific, on page 26 of the packet under works means A and B, it speaks to the ability of each of the parties or of BC Hydro and TELUS to undertake all related fittings and components, including any associated protective installations in any combination and using any type of technology or means necessary or convenient for the purposes of transmitting and distributing electricity and so on. So it sounds like the agreement is giving like a lot of discretion to both BC Hydro and TELUS to site them in whatever manner and wherever it works or is convenient. And so and I appreciate if it's just not possible to clarify whether that would interfere with our ability to use the land for educational purposes now or in the future. Just wanted to clarify what it was I was talking about. Go ahead, Secretary Treasurer.
I guess I'm just thinking about when this whole project is completed, it's going to be building, so I'm not sure. I think the buildings will impede your educational use of the land probably more than this, where these BC Hydro TELUS, like the statutory right of way. It's been quite a while since I've seen the drawings of what's on this particular property, but my understanding of that is that most of it will be filled with buildings, like housing.
So 1211 it'll be built on, essentially, is what you're saying.
Yeah, it's not
Okay.
going to be left vacant. It's
Okay.
I'm pretty sure it's a building.
Yeah, I
and
think
this is
some of
what-
the, sorry, Secretary Treasurer, go ahead.
No, that's okay.
Yeah, I think that's part of the confusion, is just not being 100% sure where this is. So that helps to know that actually the project expands onto that lot. Trustee Painter, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention I used the trustees at SD61 email. I've just sent a scanned image of, it's a aerial photograph of the Vic High with all the lot lines. It's from the facilities plan appendix. Unfortunately, it's not on the web. These particular items are not on the web, but I think it'll allow for easier orientation on the ground. Typically, I'm one of the ones who asks a million questions about statutory right-of-ways. In this one, I personally am not too terribly concerned. I've looked at it. I understand that it's basically, my interpretation, subject to clarification, is that this is effectively like a hub where electrical and phone services, internet services are going to be fed into the Caledonia project as a whole. It's essentially a substation, if you will, that they're going to build that is going to eventually service all of the buildings on the Caledonia lot. That entire Caledonia lot is going to be filled with buildings and or roads as per the plans that I know recently elected trustees may never have seen, but are hidden away in our archives and can probably be dredged out. For the term of the lease, we're not even going to be looking at that land. It's CHRC land for the entire term. At the end of the lease, subject to clarification from the Secretary Treasurer or whoever else is reading the fine line, it's my understanding that CRHC is obligated, if we end the relationship, to return the lot to bare ground. So the housing would be removed, et cetera, et cetera. And at that time, it could be used for educational purposes, school purposes. It's our property, the district property. So it would make great sense as an extension for Vic High, for example. At that time, the need for the services would either change or just vanish entirely. It would be the same as changing the services at a house or an apartment block or something like that. What's above ground will be removed by qualified professionals. What's below ground, my expectation is that there might be some local excavation if necessary, but probably will stay in the ground to eventually be dug up or altered if we use the ground for some other purpose. I anticipate other SRWs for this lot. We're going to have water service, sanitary sewers, a whole host of things that are going to be brought into this site over time. I don't know what has previously been secured for SRWs, but SRWs themselves, if you look through our history of motions, we grant quite a few of them. They're not a hugely significant thing. I understand that Caledonia was a complex one, and it's certainly worthy of further consideration. But from my personal perspective, I'm not too concerned about this one.
Trustee Painter, thanks for providing the digital image via email. Perhaps you could just direct trustees to where on that map your understanding is that the SRW would be placed. And apologies, does staff have the map? So does the Secretary, Treasurer, Superintendent, and so on have the map? You do? Okay, great. Okay, yeah. So if you wouldn't mind, well, Trustee Painter or Secretary, Treasurer, whoever, I just want to make sure that everybody knows where this is. Before we start moving motions, we need to know. Unfortunately, it just blurs. Yeah. Oh, and you're muted, Trustee Painter.
This is only for orientation purposes. I'll count on you guys to look at the image I've just sent you by email. But if you use this One Learning Community as the left-hand side of the image as you look at it, and then all the text can be read clearly. If you look over just slightly right of the whole column of boxes identifying things at that One Learning Community end of the image, you'll see a rectangle that says GVSB. This was the footprint.
Sorry, Trustee Painter, there's quite a number of rectangles that say GVRSB. So you're saying the one up at the top left.
Okay, sorry. Yes.
Yeah.
So you can
just
clearly
tell us the side streets maybe, or oriented against like where the track is or something like that?
Certainly. If you look at the track and then move to your left, there's a square that says GVSB. There's a small rectangle that says city, and then there's another larger rectangle that says GVSB.
Yeah.
And
does everybody have
okay.
that? And then it also says 1211, which is the street address. Yeah.
1211, that's right. And so if you look in the middle of that, you'll see where Caledonia Avenue butts up against that square.
Sorry, 1 second. Apologies, Trustee Painter. Do all trustees have the map? And are we all in the same place? Okay, Trustee Kwan doesn't have the map. Trustee Painter, would you mind forwarding the map to Trustee Kwan, and so we can all be on the same page? And then Trustee Bio, do you need the map as well? Okay, so Trustee Kwan and Trustee Bio, please. And then Trustee Mabowi.
I also need the map.
Okay, we want to make sure everybody's on the same page. And Trustee McNally, you need the map too?
I
Okay.
think the trustees' email perhaps only goes to you, Nicole, and senior leadership. So perhaps maybe that's why is that it didn't come to our emails yet. It gets forwarded out to us, perhaps. I don't know.
That's strange. Okay, so the Board of Trustees, everybody should get that. So let's I think it's just trustees, Trustee Painter. If you go to trustees at sd61.bc.ca, that goes to everybody. I don't know what Board of Trustees. I think it must be an old email.
Yeah, good question. I'm just getting it all set up right now.
Okay, so just pause. Thanks for your patience, folks. We just want to make sure we understand where this is before we start moving motions.
So on this, right now, I've CC'd you, Chair, but I've included trustees McNally, Gagnon, Mabobi, Bio, David, and Kwan. Does anyone else need it?
I think that's everybody. Yeah, thank you, Trustee Painter, appreciate it. Okay, so we'll just give everybody a moment to open it up, and then if you rotate it so that the One Learning banner is on the left side, it's just come through. Just look to trustees to let me know when you've got it open. Just move the thumbs up and then I'll know. Okay, Trustee Gagnon's ready. Trustee Bio's ready. Trustee Kwan, thank you. Trustee Mabobi. Trustee McNally, just let us know when you're ready. Okay. Okay. I think we're all there. If you just rotate your map so that you've got the One Learning banner on the left, and then Trustee Painter will walk us through where the
Okay.
right of way is.
I'll try one more time. I might be improving with repetition, so we'll see. So starting at the track, at the top of the track, the Gladstone Avenue side of the end of the track, you'll see in the top left corner of the square that says GVSB. Go slightly left, you'll see another rectangle that says GVSB, and this one is actually has buildings on it. The first one is a bit of a parking lot, the old parking lot. Is everyone with me so far?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, so the rectangle I just referred you to, right under where it says GVSB, it says 1211. It has 1211, so it's the lot number that is referred to in the statutory right of way. And in the middle, sort of almost, if it continued on, it would bisect that rectangle. You'll see Caledonia Avenue. Do you see where Caledonia Avenue comes up against it?
Yeah, to the
So
left.
right
Yeah.
at the north corner, so just above where Caledonia Avenue meets 1211 is where the SRW is. It looks like it's trees now. I doubt it's trees anymore, but in this image, it's just a couple of trees. So you'll see that it's on the west side of the Caledonia property. It's pretty close to what I understand will be one of the entrances to the development. And it's well away from the side of the Caledonia lot that is adjacent to the current parking lot and track.
Okay, is everybody following where we are? Everybody happy now in terms of understanding where this is going to be located? Okay, yeah. Okay, that was super helpful. Perhaps we can use those kinds of, or that kind of a map in future, just so that it's a little bit easier for us to orient ourselves. Thank you very much, everybody, for working together to get there. Okay, so any other questions about where the location of the statutory right of way is going to be located? Okay. Okay, and then we also have confirmation that it is actually on the piece of land that has been leased for the 62 years, so it's not going to impede our ability, at least in the short term, to develop or use the land for educational purposes. Is that right, Secretary Treasurer, from your perspective? Is that your understanding based on our clarification of where it is? Yeah, okay. So that is super helpful. Okay, so that being said, any other questions regarding the memo? We still have this question of like the lease time and this forever as opposed to putting a timeline in there, but I will leave that to my colleagues to consider how you feel about that. Okay, so I just want to move us back. If you just bear with me a second, I'm going to go back to our packet. We have a recommended motion. Secretary Treasurer, you were mentioning that in the agenda, as opposed to the memo, there is a shortened version of the bylaw. Were you saying that the shortened version is in the agenda itself, like on page 1 or 2 of the agenda, or is the shortened version in the memo itself?
It's actually in both. So it's on
perfect.
the agenda. The bylaw itself is the last motion. And also in the memo, I've included the shortened version followed directly with the long version.
Okay.
So it's, yeah, so you don't have to read out the full page one, you can just read out the summarized version.
Yeah, okay, so we'll see where we go. So so can you just clarify for the board then that in terms of, you have talked to council about the 62 years versus forever and in terms of negotiating these things, council's not worried about it being for forever as opposed to 62 years, or putting some kind of timeline in there?
I'm not sure if he would put all of his money on that statement, but his statement to me was that in 62 years at the end of the lease, if those works were no longer required, we would request a discharge of the charge on land title. So whether or not that would be successful is hard to say, but it's certainly something that's been done. And actually, in our own experience in the last year, we did have some lots that did have charges against them, and we were able to successfully have them removed. One of them was a statutory right of way. Others were liens. So that's a good example actually of that happening.
Okay. Okay, so it's a possibility, but basically it would have to be through the consent of the other party that we've granted the statutory right of way to. They would have full discretion on whether to grant us that or not.
I believe that is the case, unless they're no longer contactable, but those are quite large organizations, so
Yeah.
chances are they're probably,
Yeah, fair enough. Okay, all right, thank you. Okay, so unless it's built into the agreement, we would have to rely on the other parties to consent to remove those. Okay, so trustees, I'm now looking to you for some direction. How do you want to proceed? We have a recommended motion. The first recommended motion is that the Board of Education of School District number 61, Greater Victoria, approve granting a statutory right of way to BC Hydro and TELUS in respect of civil infrastructure associated with the underground distribution of electricity by BC Hydro and telecommunications and data transmission by TELUS and related works on the Caledonia redevelopment property beside Victoria High School, legally described as PID 031-731-848, Lot A, Sections 50 and 53, Spring Ridge, Victoria City, District Plan, EPP 88786. I'm at your discretion, folks. How would you like to proceed? Trustee Painter?
I'm happy to move that.
Do we have a seconder? Trustee Gagnon? Any discussion? Yeah, Trustee Kwan, go ahead.
Yeah, I think I'm just going to speak on my own behalf here. I still have some concerns about the forever in the language. 62 years is a long time, and we've seen before where things can get lost and title taken in. So there's still concern for me there, and I don't know that I'll be supporting this.
Okay, thank you, Trustee Kwan. Trustee Gagnon, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. I am realizing that we have a 62-year lease with the Caledonia project, and within this agreement, there's basically the understanding that TELUS and BC Hydro, should they no longer require this service, which would go away if the Caledonia project went away, by my understanding, would then remove the above ground portion. And then the Caledonia project would be responsible for removing the above ground portion in whatever time that was. So I really see it as going away. I also have the trust, which may be misplaced, maybe not, in that both TELUS and BC Hydro would be operating in good faith with us, that we could realistically expect to see that land come back, because I don't see 600 square feet really making or breaking it for BC Hydro or TELUS, that we would be able to get that land back once our lease agreement was up and we chose to, and by we, I mean the board of the future, chose not to possibly renew. I just see it as relatively straightforward maintenance that we now have to do in order to oversee our lease obligations, which we have made.
Thank you, Trustee Gagnon. Trustee Painter?
One of the things that I have in mind as when I look at the agreement, and it's page 34, when it talks about the works and the standard term, etc. What I'm mindful of is that maintaining this infrastructure is a cost to TELUS and Hydro. If we're not going to be using it after 60 years, or our descendants presumably are not going to be using it after 60 years, some of you young trustees might be around then it would be a liability for those two utilities, and it would be in their interest to remove it. Otherwise it's a cost to them. What I think is more likely is we'll come up with something else to do with the land that is more in keeping with the priorities and values of the time period, and that whatever changes are made, there will be the opportunity to amend those. But the other point is we're providing that to them for the use of, for a specific purpose. So underground transformers, kiosks, pad mounted or underground transformers, etc. So we're not giving them carte blanche to do whatever they want with the property. It's for a specific purpose. So, someone in Hydro is not going to build a 600 square foot house on that lot and be able to continue to use it. So it's very narrowly defined what it can be used for. And for myself, again, I don't see it as being anything more than a legitimate continuation of the development of that property as it has been leased.
Thank you, Trustee Painter. Any other discussion before I call the question? No, seeing none. Okay, so everybody's clear on the motion that we're moving. So this is the first piece. This is just to approve the granting, but we haven't gone into bylaw readings yet. That comes next, assuming the board votes in favor. Okay, so all those in favor with show of hands. All those opposed. Abstentions. Okay, so we have all those in favor, Trustee Kwan against, and Trustee Duncan abstaining. Okay, so we are now going to be moving into our next recommended motion. That is that the Board of Education of School District number 61, Greater Victoria, agree to give all 3 readings of the Caledonia Electrical Distribution and Telecommunication Transmission Disposal Right-of-Way of Real Property Bylaw 24-01. And so again, trustees, just to clarify, in order to give all 3 readings, we would have to have unanimous agreement to do so this evening. Otherwise, we would just be able to do first and second reading. Okay, any discussion? Trustee McNally, go ahead.
Well, I mean, I'm absolutely not well versed in land title, documents or bylaws or anything like that. But, Trustee Kwan, I believe, well, she pointed out that forever isn't 64 years or whatever the 60 number is, and that bothers me too. I mean, I don't want to sign off on something that says, on one page, we're giving you this right forever, and on another page it says we're giving you this right for 65 years. So I I plan to, get through whatever 1, 2, but not finalize this tonight until we find out if forever really means 65 years in this universe or not.
Thank you, Trustee McNally. Any other discussion? And again, we're just moving to have all 3 readings heard tonight. And again, it would need to be a unanimous vote in order to proceed with all 3 readings tonight. Okay, all those in favor with a show of hands? All those opposed? And abstentions? Okay, so we have the balance of the board opposed with Trustee Painter and Trustee Gagnon abstaining. Okay, so we're not going to do all 3 readings tonight. We can do the first and second reading, however. And then I think what I'm hearing from colleagues is that there is an interest in hearing or having some clarity about whether we can't simply negotiate into these agreements the actual, like a timeline, rather than saying forever. So we'll come back to that piece in a minute, but the next order of operations this evening is the first reading of the bylaw. So the recommended motion is as follows: that the Board of Education of School District number 61, Greater Victoria, Caledonia Electrical Distribution and Telecommunications Transmission Disposal Right-of-Way of Real Property Bylaw 24-01, being a bylaw to grant a statutory right-of-way to BC Hydro and TELUS on the Caledonia redevelopment property beside Victoria High School, legally described as PID 031-731-848, Lot A, Sections 50 and 53, Spring Ridge, Victoria City, District Plan EPP 88786, in respect of civil infrastructure associated with the underground distribution of electricity by BC Hydro and telecommunications and data transmission by TELUS and related works. Read a first time this 14th day of November 2023, and that the Secretary Treasurer and the Board Chair be authorized to execute and seal this bylaw on behalf of the Board. Any discussion, trustees? Hearing none, all those in favor with a show of hands. Oh, sorry, Trustee McNally. Yeah. Mover and seconder.
That we wait. I lost it. I heard that that the secretary and the chair be authorized to sign off on this, and
Yeah.
I'm just where are we here?
Yeah, so if you go to page,
We
like, so
approved the granting of a statutory right of way to BC Hydro and TELUS, right? We did that. And then we went down to all 3 readings, and we didn't do that. We voted that down.
That's right.
So
We're
I
proceeding with
see what
first
you're
reading.
saying. Even if you read it the first time, it authorizes, at least in the wording.
Yeah, so we're going to go through first reading, and then assuming that passes, we're going to go through second reading, and then we're going to stop there. And then I'm going to come back
I
to the
just
board.
don't see the point of doing any readings at all until we get we've given them the right of way in principle, but just for me, I don't see any point in doing any more readings until we get the clarity that we seek.
Okay, well, if we don't do readings tonight, then we'll have to look at doing all 3 readings at the November board meeting or at a special board meeting, if that's what we decide to do. I'm at your discretion. So trustees, if there isn't a mover and a seconder, then we won't proceed with any of the readings. It's up to you. From a procedural perspective, it's just, if the board wants to move in this direction, it's just a little faster to do it by doing the first and second reading tonight, and then just having 1 reading to do, pending that clarity from the Secretary Treasurer. But again, I'm at your discretion, so you direct me how you want to proceed.
Well, I'm not going to,
Well, so do I have a
so
mover? I guess, sorry, trustee
I'd
McNally,
like
I
to
just want to
hear.
clarify. Do I have a
Yeah.
mover and a seconder? Trustee Painter, sorry, were you moving it? Okay, and do I have seconder? Trustee Gagnon? Okay. Okay, so now let's have discussion. So we've got a mover and a seconder for the first reading. Any discussion around the first reading? All right, hearing none. All those in favor of the first reading of the bylaw? All those opposed? And abstentions, we don't have any. Okay, so that's the balance of the board in favor of first reading and trustee Kwan opposed. Okay. Okay, thanks, trustees. Okay, so now I'm going to move us into second reading. So bear with me. The Board of Education of School District number 61, Greater Victoria, Caledonia Electrical Distribution and Telecommunication transmission disposal right of way of real property bylaw 24-01, being a bylaw to grant a statutory right of way to BC Hydro and TELUS on the Caledonia redevelopment property beside Victoria High School, legally described as PID 031-731-848, Lot A, Sections 50 and 53, Spring Ridge, Victoria City District Plan EPP 88786, in respect of civil infrastructure associated with the underground distribution of electricity by BC Hydro and telecommunications and data transmission by TELUS and related works, read a second time this 14th day of November 2023, and that the Secretary Treasurer and the Board Chair be authorized to execute and seal this bylaw on behalf of the Board. May I have a mover? Thank you, Trustee Mabobi, and a seconder, Trustee Gagnon. Any discussion in relation to second reading? All right, hearing none. All those in favor of second reading with a show of hands. Okay, and all those opposed? Okay, so we have the balance of the board in favor with Trustee Kwan opposed. All right, thank you, trustees. We're going to pause there. We're not going to be doing any or a third reading tonight. Wondered if we want to be giving the Secretary Treasurer direction by a motion in terms of what clarity the board wants her to seek through council about this issue of 62 years. Secretary Treasurer, I'm assuming you would prefer a board motion so that you're clear on the direction, or do you feel like you have enough information to go back to council to get the clarity for the board so that we can either execute third reading or not? Go ahead, Secretary.
Yeah, I actually already emailed legal counsel.
Okay.
I think that I understand. You're asking if the agreement can be for a limited term. So 62 years, like the length of the lease versus forever. So
Correct.
I've asked if he's ever seen that with BC Hydro and TELUS specifically. So as soon as I hear back, I can let you know.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Secretary Treasurer. So it sounds like the Secretary Treasurer is already clear and is already way ahead of us. So I don't think we need a motion, folks. Trustee McNally, go ahead.
Also, just because because of my ignorance of these forms and processes, on page 32, and I know this is standard boilerplate, it's just a form, but it says transfers, and that we are transferring this land, or are we transferring title? I don't know. It doesn't sound cooperative. It sounds like we're giving something away. So I'd like to just know more about the legal implications of it's page 32, where I'm looking particularly at number 5.
Yeah, thanks, Trustee McNally. And you're right, it is a transfer of interest in the land. Secretary Treasurer, are you able to provide some more clarity than that to Trustee McNally tonight?
Yes, Chair, you're correct. It is a transfer of interest in land. If you look a little bit further down under terms, it's filed standard charge terms. So it's a charge against the title, the land title. And then that larger document that's attached, those are the standard charge terms. So that's the agreement that goes along with it that identifies what interest is being transferred to those two parties by the school district.
All right, thank you, Secretary Treasurer. Okay, so I'm going to move us on in our agenda, folks. We're not doing third reading tonight, so we have one more item, which is question period. Just looking to staff to direct me if we have any questions this evening.
Yes, through the chair, there were 2 questions that came in, and I've sent them to you in an email, Chair Duncan.
Thank you very much, Deputy Superintendent. Just bear with me, folks. Let me have a look what we've got tonight. Okay, so it looks like we have 2 questions. Is that right, Deputy Superintendent? Have I identified all the two? There's 2 questions?
Yes, 2 questions.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so the first question. Okay, so the individual says, I'm hoping the board can answer a question in relation to Amy Reed's presentation in April relating to the education challenges at Quadra Elementary, the need for more support, and her offer for the board to attend her classroom. Has anyone from the board visited an elementary school classroom at Quadra or any inner city catchment school as Ms. Reed offered in her presentation? If not, would you be willing to commit to spending a morning or afternoon in a classroom to experience Ms. Reed's concerns and gain a better understanding of the state of the public education offered at schools in lower income areas? So I'm going to turn to the superintendent just in terms of the resource question. And then I don't know if I can really answer on behalf of my colleagues, but and I don't believe there was a formal invitation, or certainly I don't recall a formal invitation to attend Ms. Reed's classroom, but there may have been a general invitation. I can't be certain. I would turn to staff to help me recall, but I know colleagues will have visited various schools within their family of schools or potentially within their family of schools. I myself have not visited Quadra Elementary or Ms. Reed's classroom. Just wanted to turn to the superintendent to see if there's any other information just in terms of allocation of resources and supports that might help this individual.
Thank you, through the chair. So we have identified approximately 10 elementary schools that are prioritized, and within the prioritization, we provide kindergarten teacher collaboration cohort, which is strengthening early years transition to kindergarten. We also have provided these schools with reframing behavior as communication workshops. We have targeted speech and language pathologist roles in the priority schools with a focus on early years and intervention. Nonviolent crisis intervention training has been provided for all of the priority schools. We have 30-hour EAG positions in these schools. We've also provided additional school-based inclusive learning funds and staffing, and some admin time. So when we're looking at these 10 priority schools, we are providing additional supports and services and funding to these schools.
Thank you, Superintendent. I think that'll be helpful. And I've just realized I may have jumped the gun a little bit. That also, I think, is very pertinent to the next question. So the next question this evening is, since Ms. Amy Reed's presentation in April, in what ways does the board feel there has been action taken this year towards equitable division of resources between affluent and vulnerable schools to support students' safety and learning environments? And so I think the superintendent spoke to many of those, but it's ongoing work. I guess what I would offer the individual who's asking the question is that it's ongoing work. We're just about to go into a budget process where equity and resource allocation will be at the heart of our considerations, and I'm sure the recommendations that come forward. So stay tuned, and I would encourage individuals like to, if they can, to participate in the budget process. So we can continue this dialogue. All right. Thank you very much to the requesters. Any other questions that have come in since I asked last? Or are we done with question period?
Yes, we have a third question that's come in that says that.
Go ahead.
Can I forward it on? Would you like me to read it out?
Oh, go ahead and read it out. Given the late hour, we won't delay, if you don't mind, Deputy Superintendent.
You didn't answer my question. Will you commit to visiting a classroom? Please answer this.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. No, if we get an invitation to attend a classroom, I will only speak for myself. I don't feel comfortable speaking for my colleagues, but I suspect they would feel the same way. If we have an invitation to attend a classroom, we're overjoyed and very happy to do so. Some of us have had opportunities to attend classrooms in other capacities, whether it's to read books to kindergartners, which is a lot of fun. So yeah, we most certainly welcome invitations to attend classrooms. Okay, all right, folks. I believe that we're now at the end of our agenda. I'm just going to make sure. I believe we're at public disclosure of in-camera items. We don't have any this evening, and that leaves us to move a motion to adjourn. So thank you everybody for your patience tonight. We're almost at 10:30 exactly. Apologies for the late hour, but we really appreciate your time. May I have a mover to adjourn? Thank you, Trustee Gagnon, seconded by Trustee McNally. All those in favor? And that is unanimous. Take care, folks. Thanks again. Good night.